BBC News, hello, I'm Eileen McHugh. The Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the Army Chief of Staff say federal government troops are in full control of Mekelle, the capital of Tigray province. Mr Abiy said military operations were over after more than 3 weeks of fighting against local TPLF forces. A government minister, Sadiq Abraha, said the TPLF had been defeated.
They tried to put up a resistance, but they lost. You know, TPLF has been losing the war in many fronts. This is just the wrapping up stage. This is the last stage. TPLF defense forces have been weakened all along throughout many battles that we have had. And so they are facing us in a very weakened manner. We had exchanges of fire, but finally they lost.
There's been no independent confirmation of the government's claims. Communications remain largely cut off and observers have been denied access. The Tigrayan leader, Debretsion Gebremichael, indicated that his forces would fight on. French riot police have clashed with radical demonstrators in Paris after a day of protests nationwide against a proposed security law. The bill would make it an offence to share footage of the security forces online with malicious intent. Protesters argue that the move could lead to the police brutality going unchecked. Here's Lucy Williamson.
Police are always a target at protests like this. Today, though, they were the reason for them. Around Place de la Bastille, cars and buildings were set alight as small groups of hardliners fought running battles with riot police. Among the buildings set on fire was one belonging to the Bank of France, an anarchist sign scrawled on the wall outside. The clashes, as usual, were around the edges of a largely peaceful march, but this new law has hit a tender nerve in France.
Thousands of anti-abortion demonstrators have gathered in the streets of Buenos Aires and other Argentine cities to express their anger at a government proposal to legalise the practice. Under the current law, women are only allowed to terminate their pregnancy in cases of rape or if they face a significant health risk. This demonstrator said she considered abortion when she was abused as a teenager, but doesn't agree with it being legalised.
Obviously, at first I thought about having an abortion. I also thought about giving it up for adoption, and I even thought about killing myself. I thought if my son didn't have the right to live, then neither did I. But thank God I was able to have my son. Today he's 30 years old, and he's the greatest pride of my life.
President Alberto Fernandez says the bill he sent to Congress earlier this month will reduce the number of unsafe abortions carried out illegally across the country. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. Protesters have returned to the streets of Guatemala City to demand the resignation of President Alejandro Yamatei a week after clashes which led to part of the Congress building being set on fire. The unrest was caused in part by the approval of a new budget by Guatemala's Congress, which envisaged cuts to spending on health and education. The United Nations has warned against escalating tensions after the assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Iran's leadership has blamed Israel, an ally of President Trump's administration, for the attack and promised to avenge his death. But President Hassan Rouhani appeared to indicate that retaliation wouldn't happen immediately. Siavash Mehdi Ardalan from BBC Persian has this assessment.
The balance of power seems to be in favor of Rouhani's approach, which is to just wait it out, and then once the new U.S. administration takes over, let's see where we can get in terms of reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. But at the same time, you have hardliners who are already blaming the Rouhani administration for this assassination, saying that it's your overtures to the West and your eagerness to revive the nuclear deal that has put us in this vulnerable position where the Israelis and the Americans feel emboldened enough that they can assassinate our nuclear scientists.
Canada has blocked the bulk export of scarce medicines in response to President Trump's plans to allow drugs to be imported across the border to lower costs in the United States. The health minister in Ottawa said shortages were a challenge during the coronavirus pandemic. An American entrepreneur who founded the online shoe and clothing retailer Zappos has died after being injured in a house fire. Tony Shea had been visiting family in the state of Connecticut, having recently retired. He was 46. Over a decade ago, he sold Zappos to Amazon for more than $1 billion. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Conversation. I'm Kim Chakanetsa, and today we are celebrating the BBC 100 Women List, which every year names 100 influential and inspirational women from around the world and shares their stories. With me are a panel of women who, through their creativity, tenacity and optimism, are making a difference in their own way. These are 4 women who want to turn the COVID-19 pandemic into an opportunity to be seized, a chance to re-examine the way we live and address issues such as how can we bring communities together, how better can we support lonely people, and what can be done to make employment more flexible and inclusive. Those are some of the questions I'll be asking them with the help of my on-screen audience, which includes some of our former guests on the program, who in true 2020 style are joining me remotely. But first, let me introduce our 4 panelists. First up is Shani Danda, an award-winning disability specialist and social entrepreneur from the UK. Shani founded the Asian Women Festival and Asian Disability Network and has been campaigning to make society more inclusive. You'll hear from her how the pandemic could prompt a shift in the working lives of disabled people. Joining us from Sierra Leone is the mayor of the capital, Freetown, Yvonne Akisoya. Yvonne has been mayor since 2018 and in that time has poured her energy into transforming the city and fighting climate change. Yvonne is an action woman, someone who believes in turning frustration and dissatisfaction into a positive, a quality that has served her well as she helps her city navigate the pandemic. The third member of our panel joins us from Norway. Been on a fascinating mission to seek technological solutions to involuntary loneliness. We'll definitely hear more about some of the creative solutions she has come up with. And Karen is the CEO and co-founder of No Isolation. Congratulations to the 3 of you for your place on the BBC 100 Women list. And our 4th and final panel member is Aditi Mittal, one of India's best-known female stand-up comedians. When she is not bringing her own brand of irreverent humour to comedy venues, she uses it as a way to shine a light on the lack of women in India's workforce through her podcast, Women in Labour. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I'd like to start with a quick lightning round question. What have you done because of lockdown that you wouldn't have done otherwise? And it could be as simple as being able to spend more time with your family or acquiring a new hobby. Shani, have you managed to learn a new language? What have you done?
I haven't learned any language, but I have completed a jigsaw puzzle that I would never have done previous. I would just not have had the time. And I've also saved money, working from home, working remotely. It's just, helped me save loads of money, which is great.
Fantastic. Now, Yvonne, as a busy mayor, I suspect you haven't had much downtime, but were you able to do anything you wouldn't normally do?
There was something, family time. So I have a sister in Canada, a sister in the US, one sister here, and my parents are here as well, here in being Freetown. And it's been actually really interesting because you don't normally get together, but we started doing Zoom family get-togethers, bringing us together. So it has been a pleasant addition to our lives.
Fantastic. Aditi, have you cracked the spine of some book which has been at your bedside for months, years? What have you done?
One, I got a Kindle. Secondly, I got a dog.
Karen, what about you? What have you managed to do?
I actually cannot come up with a single thing that I've done very differently. I'm traveling a lot less, meaning that I've made more food. I'm going to have to be boring. I'm making more food. That's it.
That's not boring. Well, from the various screens and backgrounds, I think we're all connecting from our homes except for Yvonne, because I can see some flags in the background. So Yvonne, are you in your office there?
I am in my office. Lockdown, COVID has not changed my work life. It's gotten as busy, more busy.
I can imagine. But that was one of the big changes for many of us. People were suddenly having to work from home. And I want to start with a question about this from the audience. And this question is from Itua Iyoha in Nigeria. Itua, you've been working from home since March. How have you found it?
Yes, I have. So for context, I work with a management consulting firm in Lagos in Nigeria. So the transition to working from home was a bit bumpy for me because the work I do is very collaborative. I need to constantly interact with my team members and with my clients. So it was really mentally exhausting just going from one video conference call to the next for hours and hours on end. no face-to-face human interaction. But then on the flip side, I had a similar experience to other people who are on the panel, which is that I was able to save some time and money, not having to commute to the office every single day. And funny enough, on that point about saving money, I've heard of this school of thought that says that people who work from home should actually pay for the privilege of doing that. So I read about this Deutsche Bank research, which says that people working from home should pay an additional 5% income tax, which would then be used to subsidize workers that don't have the option of doing so. So personally, I think that would be a terrible idea because rather the government should be trying to encourage people to work from home because it reduces pressure on public transportation services, for example. So I'm very curious about what the panel thinks. Has working from home been a net positive overall? And could a tax on remote work be a good idea?
Karen, I'll start with you. How has it been for you working from home?
Absolutely terrible, except for the first 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks in March, I just got everything done. It felt like the greatest freedom to just sit and concentrate and no one bothering me. And then, fatigue. I have a lot of collaborative work as well, and it's been devastating not to be able to meet up with people, and I miss it a lot. But yeah, at the same time, I agree that the flexibility in being able to work from home a lot more than we were used to before the pandemic is something that's definitely here to stay.
Well, Shawnee, you've been campaigning for people to have the ability to work from home for some time now. So suddenly it's come into place overnight. What do you think of this idea of income tax, of people paying extra?
I think it's an awful idea, and yet again it's going to affect the people that need that flexibility the most, i.e. disabled workers, parents, carers, and not to say that it's only a certain group of people that want flexible working. We all do. And I think it's been proven now over the last year that it can be very productive as well to work from home. And interestingly, I shared this story on LinkedIn, and it's been one of the most commented posts this year. People are like, this is an awful idea. Why would someone want to introduce this? So it's something that people feel very passionately about. But I think generally now we've all had a taste of what it's like to work remotely and to work from home. Those of us that were campaigning for it before the pandemic are a bit relieved that people can now see the benefits and have trialled it at least.
Aditi, what does working from home look like for you as a stand-up comedian?
Depressing. Because so much of our job is very much based on being in the same room as someone. Stand-up is when you go, you say something stupid and then people laugh, and then you take that after and then you say something stupider, out of like, it's that give and take of energy. And when that energy is missing, it feels like a huge element of what you do and why you love doing it just goes away. And it's also, depressing to live with your own thoughts. I did not realize I was a semi-despicable personality till this happened. I was like, ew, that voice in my head, who is she?
Well, Yvonne, the option of working from home is not one afforded to everyone. And I can imagine in Freetown that there is a significant amount of the population that need to be out and about to make an income, for example, if you're a market trader. So how have you managed to help people strike that balance between saving lives and livelihoods?
Thanks, Kim. I think it's really important to build on what you just said, just to highlight that. There's a big debate around people having the option to work from home, but there's also the reality of the many, many people for whom that can never be an option. Essential workers, for example, who during the pandemic, the healthcare workers, sanitation workers, and as you've said, Kim, in a country such as ours, where 60% of the economy is in the informal sector, working from home, if you're a market trader and a cattle rider, is simply not an option. It comes back to why was there a need to stay at home, right? If the case is for safety, then what we're doing is trying to make those places where people are having to go to work more safe. I'll take the markets, for example. We've been doing some work with improving market conditions, making sure there's water there, providing masks for women who are going to be there because they have no choice.
And I guess I want to come back to you, Itua. Overall, for you, would you say that the benefits of working from home have outweighed the stresses, the negatives? Could you imagine doing it permanently, Itua?
Yes, sure. I think I could actually. I think what I would expect though from my employer is putting more things in place to enable people to do this long term. But on the flip side, I'd want to balance it out with the option of coming into the office maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Just to have that human interaction, which is so important for what I do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to her. And she's absolutely right. That human interaction is what I miss most about not being able to turn to a colleague and chat about your weekend or discuss whatever program you are watching. And that can really lead to people feeling lonely. And loneliness is a real issue, particularly among the elderly, but it also seems increasingly to be an issue for people in their late teens and early 20s. That's according to the UK's Mental Health Foundation. And Karen, I want to bring you in here because loneliness is something you've been trying to combat long before the pandemic. What led you to decide to tackle loneliness?
What got us started, my co-founders and I, was a friend of mine who'd worked as a nurse at a children's ward, and she was mentioning how these kids were faring, and it's no surprise to anyone that if you are 9 years old and you have cancer, it's not going to be a joyride. But what struck me was how she talked about them. They were only speaking to their parents. They were so bored. And then I spoke to what became my co-founders, Marius and Matthias, about this, and we couldn't really grasp why these kids weren't socially connected. Like, they have iPads, they have computers, they have phones, they have everything. Like, why should a hospital bed be a barrier to them at all? And then we started doing some research, and that became point of no return, because none of the tools that these kids had actually enabled them to participate. The school wasn't rigged for them to attend through technology. Nothing was really there to support them catching up with these day-to-day events. Like, they had ways to look in, but not to be there. So we ended up making a telepresence robot for kids specifically, so that they can remote control their robot from their sickbed and be in class and talk to their friends and hear everyone and come out in the schoolyard during break and just be there. And I think that's exactly the type of flexibility that Shani pointed out. Is like, we need to make this infrastructure work so that when you cannot go there physically, you shouldn't be kept from doing so.
Yeah. I think all too often we dismiss or overlook the effects of loneliness, but studies show that social isolation is linked to very serious health conditions. Karen, can you just tell us a bit about what some of those studies reveal?
It's quite devastating what loneliness does to us, because if you don't know that you have someone to talk to or rely on, you go into the stress mode, and the stress mode becomes chronic over time, and it leaves you with what has been proved now to be 32% increased risk of having a stroke, a 29% increased risk of having a heart attack, and I think it was almost a third more likely that you pass away earlier if you have been experiencing loneliness for larger parts of your life, meaning that this is actually more dangerous than smoking. It's more dangerous than obesity. Like, we need to talk to people, and we need to know that we have people to rely on. It's definitely something that we should all be concerned with fixing.
Well, another question from the audience now. This is from Jules Walker. She's in the UK. Jules writes and podcasts about cycling. She's also a carer for her mother. Jules, let's hear your question, please.
Thank you so much. Just in light of what the panel have been talking about in regards to loneliness and isolation, keeping active is something that I have found has been very good for me. Obviously, I come from a cycling background. That's what I enjoy doing. That's my whole life, my career, and also a space for me to get mental freedom and to break out. And especially with what's been going on with COVID-19, it's been really important to stay outside and be active. So my question to the panel is, as keeping active and being outside is vital for good mental health, how can we actually encourage that to continue?
Aditi, I'll come to you. Any thoughts on how to encourage people to stay active and continue to do so?
I run a hashtag called Kasrat Hi Hasrat, which in Hindi translates to exercise is the only redemption. And I've been working out almost every morning at 8 o'clock. I do an Instagram live and I work out live. It also sort of feeds into my desperate need for attention as a performer and comedian. And I've also I've made it a point to make it like, this is not about me getting skinny. This is about me just, mentally taking care of myself.
Well, Shani, you were diagnosed with brittle bone disease as a child, and I understand you were often bedbound and isolated. So that must give you a unique perspective. What did you find helped you to deal with being isolated?
Just everything that Karen was saying earlier about loneliness and isolation, I could say that I experienced the exact same thing. You know, I would be in hospital for a minimum of 6 months every time I would break a bone, and my condition means that my bones would break without any trauma. And by the age of 14, I had broken my legs 6 times. So you can only imagine how much time away from school and my peers that meant. You know, I was very fortunate. I am part of the South Asian community. I have a huge family, so many cousins, and they've kind of replaced the fact that maybe at a younger age I didn't have that sort of friends circle because I'd always be in hospital. But I think that's definitely allowed me to be really comfortable in my own company. And I would say for the large part of 2020, I have been shielding. I didn't even go out for daily exercise, but I think exercise is so important. And I've bought a couple of things to help me keep active indoors. People are being really inspired to just open their kitchen cupboards and, you know, get tinned food and exercise with. So I think it's really shown people how to be innovative and the importance of keeping active, really.
Yvonne, I understand that you're focused on looking after the well-being of your city, but what about your own well-being? How do you make sure that you are doing okay?
Well, I couldn't agree more with everybody about the importance of exercise, but agreeing doesn't mean you do it, right?
Not at all.
But having said that, I exercise for half an hour in the morning. So I just spend time on my veranda before I go into the office. But during COVID, it did affect me because there was a lot of work. And then I'm one of these people, if my mind is like so super distracted with work, I find it hard to concentrate. Like I start exercising and I'm going, no, I should be working. I try to walk the talk. I do have a commitment. On a very serious note, we all should exercise, and I am committed.
Like the politician in you, we should all exercise. Well, Jules, thank you for your question. And now, just to remind you, you're listening to a special edition of The Conversation with me, Kim Chakanetsa. And we're talking about how the pandemic is changing how we live and work with the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone's capital, Yvonne Akisoya, the tech entrepreneur, Karen Dolver, the comedian, Aditi Mittal, and the disability campaigner, Shani Danda. Okay, let's take another question. This one is from Lauren Klein, an associate professor at Emory University in the US. Lauren, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much for taking my question. I work across the fields of data science and the humanities. And so what this means is that I think about how data can be used to answer questions about people and culture. And in particular, for me, I look at questions about women and non-binary folks. And recently, this has meant spending a lot of time looking at the data relating to COVID and how gender inequality shows up in the data or not, as the case may be. So, you know, one thing about the pandemic is that it's brought renewed awareness to how impact is not distributed equally across genders. So you have, on the one hand, men seeming to experience the physical effects of COVID more severely, but then on the other, you have women bearing a disproportionate share of caregiving responsibilities, and sometimes as a result, leaving the workplace. Or you have women constituting the majority of frontline workers. So nursing home workers and home health aid positions, as well as grocery and retail workers. So these women are disproportionately impacted by COVID, but not explicitly because of their gender, sort of indirectly. So my question is this. Given the spotlight that the pandemic has drawn to these gender disparities, and I actually do think that it has, is there a possibility that we will move forward with an increased awareness of the relationship between gender and health, and in particular, how structural inequality, as opposed to outright or explicit discrimination, is often at the root of the disparities faced by women and non-binary folks?
Yvonne, this one's for you.
Lauren, the timing of this question couldn't be better because there's a recognition that what you're saying is absolutely true. I think the statistics I was looking at yesterday was that the gender parity pay gap, the rate at which it's going now, it will now take 257 years for women and men to get to the same point. and that this situation has actually been exacerbated by COVID. It's so much worse in 2020 than it was in 2019 for all the things you've said, Lauren. And so from the perspective of a city mayor, female city mayor, I'm really committed to addressing this through policy. Because whether it's the healthcare workers, whether it's the people who are leading the policy making, inevitably what you have is women doing the work and men making the decisions. And that's just what we face. What can we do through COVID? Perhaps one of the positives of this is that it's brought it to the fore. It's brought it to the fore at a time when we can do what we're doing. We can have 6 women speaking to each other from around the world. We're being able to bring these conversations together, add what we're seeing in our different situations, and plot and plan about how we're going to change this. And plan and plot, we must. Policy level, as a city mayor, but you're all residents of cities. So how do you put pressure? In your stand-up comedy, I'm sure you talk about this all the time, as an academic, with the work that you're both doing, with loneliness, with disability, it's about joining the dots. One thing that's absolutely certain is that we cannot allow this to just work itself out. It is not going to. We are going to need to take action as women. We're not in silos as much as we may have been in the past. And this is definitely one of the upsides of technology, which has come to the front through COVID.
Thank you, Yvonne. That was very comprehensive. And Aditi, you have a podcast about women in work, women in labour. What have been the benefits of men being in the home more in India, men spending more time at home?
I mean, again, Lauren, this was such an incredible question. And one of the statistics that sort of made us do the podcast was that the participation of Indian women in the workforce was at 19%. That number was dismal, the second lowest in the world. And as of COVID, we had dropped to the lowest in the world. So the lowest participation of women in the workplace, formal and informal. And ironically enough, there's a phrase that says a woman's work is never done. Then how is she not being counted in the workforce? Indian women's participation in the workforce is falling drastically because men are not helping out at home. The domestic responsibility of taking care of a full house, and South Asian families live with multiple generations under the same roof, that responsibility tends to fall on the woman. And so for most women, it was so difficult to go to work full-time and then come back and take care of a family full-time. With working from home and COVID, I think it became obvious to a lot of men how much work their partners were putting into sort of the household, into bringing up the child, and they were able to see it with their own eyes. Like for the first 6 months of the pandemic, there was this long discussion about how men are helping out at home now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aditi. So we're going to take a break for the news. We'll be right back after.